I never believed in the town's taboos. Perhaps it was because I always thought they were just superstitions made up by the older generation. That was until that night, until I opened that door at midnight. Only then did I realize that my world would never return to its former state. I had just moved to this quiet little town in the northeastern United States. Life here was so different from my busy city life. People lived simply, peacefully, and cared for each other. Despite the tranquility and beauty of this place, the townsfolk always seemed cautious, with an underlying sense of unease. The older residents especially often told me, "There are things you must not ask about, do, or touch." At first, I dismissed these words. They seemed like ancient superstitions. Then I met an old man named Edward, who spoke to me about these taboos. He told me that there were 5 rules I must follow, or the consequences would be unimaginable. He said, "The first rule, never knock on anyone's door at night, especially a stranger's. The second rule, never look back at the darkness behind you after midnight. The third rule, never insert a second key into the door at any time. The fourth rule, never look at the reflection of the figure behind you in a mirror. The fifth rule, never look up at the moon in the sky, especially a full moon." Though these taboos confused me, I thought they were just old people's superstitions. I didn't take them seriously and continued living my life. However, one day, something happened. I unintentionally broke one of the taboos. That night, I was alone at home, sorting through some belongings. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. I checked the clock. It was already midnight. I hesitated for a moment, thinking that perhaps it was a neighbor in need. Ignoring the taboo, I went to open the door. Standing at the door was not a neighbor, but a stranger. He wore a hooded cloak, and his face was obscured, making it impossible to see his features. He looked weary, his eyes hollow, as if he had gone through something terrible. He spoke in a low voice. "Can I come in?" Though I felt uneasy, I didn't immediately refuse. I looked into his soulless eyes, and a sudden chill ran down my spine. I almost instinctively wanted to slam the door shut, but I forced myself to stay calm and asked, "Do you need help?" His smile began to twist into something eerie, the corners of his mouth curving upward. "I just need a little time. You'll understand soon enough." At that moment, I remembered what Edward had said about the first taboo. Never knock on anyone's door at night, especially a stranger's. A shiver ran through me, and a sense of foreboding gripped me. I quickly closed the door and stood behind it, a sense of dread overwhelming me. For the next few hours, my mood grew heavier. I felt an invisible force closing in on my home, and the sound of the man's eerie laugh echoed in my ears. I tried calling for help, but none of the communication tools seemed to work. The phone lines were dead, the cell signal was gone, and the street outside had become eerily silent. After midnight, I decided to return to my room, hoping to shake off the feeling of unease. But as I walked down the hall, my gaze involuntarily fixed on the mirror. I knew Edward had warned, "Never look at the reflection of the figure behind you in a mirror." Yet, for some reason, my eyes were locked onto the reflection. My face was twisted into a strange smile, and behind me, there stood a vague figure. I spun around quickly, but there was nothing in the room. My heart raced like thunder, and I hurried away from the mirror, rushing to the window. The night sky was lit by a full moon, its cold light streaming through the window and bathing me in its glow. I instantly remembered the 5th taboo: never look up at the moon, especially a full moon. At that moment, the temperature in the room dropped sharply, and I felt a coldness like never before. My breath became labored, as if something invisible was pressing down on my chest. I dared not look outside, but the scene before my eyes grew increasingly blurry. It felt as though the darkness was consuming everything around me, and the world was beginning to warp. It was then that I realized I had violated the taboos, and now everything was spiraling out of control. I could hear a low, distant voice drawing closer, its tone growing clearer and clearer. "You've broken the taboos, Catherine." In that instant, I felt an intense tug. My body involuntarily pulled backward, and everything went black. I tried to scream, but no sound escaped. My consciousness faded, and the world around me disappeared. The next morning, the townspeople found my house door ajar, the curtains swaying in the breeze. I had vanished without a trace. The only clue was the smile in front of the mirror and the full moon shining through the window. No one dared speak my name again. And that night, the midnight knock echoed once more. The townspeople quietly covered their ears, for they knew that those who broke the taboos would ultimately become the town's unspoken, terrifying legend.